The Architect and the Professor. A New Year's Eve revelation. Attention! If you think you know how this story ends, think again. The deafening pop of fireworks echoing over London's River Thames filled the crystal ballroom of the Dorchester Hotel. My long velvet gown, a deep emerald green, swished against the polished marble with every hesitant step. My heart beat like a war drum, each thrumming pulse reverberating in my ears like distant thunder. There I was, Eleanor Hayes, a 38-year-old high school math teacher, wearing a dress I had sewn myself, based on a design I saw in a magazine at a doctor's office. My hands trembled as I clutched the small gold clutch I had bought at a department store with money I had saved for months, hiding every 5-pound note in an empty coffee tin at the back of my kitchen cupboard. I felt every eye turn toward me like a blinding spotlight, scrutinizing every detail of my simple appearance in this ocean of luxury and ostentation. The air was saturated with a heady mix of Bollinger champagne, expensive French perfumes, and the scent of imported tropical flowers that decorated every table like small hanging gardens in a galaxy of crystal and gold. The annual New Year's Eve party, hosted by the Montgomery Group, where my husband David had worked as a civil engineer for 8 years, was a mythical event in my imagination. It was a legendary celebration held every year at one of London's most exclusive hotels, bringing together the city's business elite for a night of excess and networking that defined alliances for the coming year. For all those years, I had been systematically excluded from this celebration, as if I were a distant, embarrassing relative who didn't deserve to be part of my husband's important circles. David always came up with elaborate and seemingly reasonable excuses. "It's too posh for you, Eleanor. You wouldn't feel comfortable around all those sophisticated people. It's just for the directors and important investors. It would be too boring for someone who doesn't understand the business. The company only allows couples where both work in the construction sector. You'd understand if you knew how this complex corporate world works. But this time was different. This time, after months of discreet and emotionally draining investigation, I knew exactly why he never took me. It wasn't about social appropriateness or company policy. It was about pure and simple shame. David was ashamed of me in the most profound and humiliating way possible. For years, small signs had accumulated like raindrops, forming a devastating flood that finally threatened to destroy our home. Seemingly innocent comments about how I didn't take care of myself like the other executives' wives. Constant, increasingly insistent suggestions about restrictive diets and expensive gyms. Veiled criticisms of my clothes, which he deemed inappropriate for certain social occasions. The way he abruptly changed the subject when colleagues asked about me during phone calls I could overhear from the other room. How he systematically avoided including me in conversations about couples he knew from work. How his face would close off when I suggested we go out together to a social event. Everything conspired to tell me a story my heart desperately refused to accept. My own husband was deeply ashamed to introduce me to the world that really mattered to him. I wasn't thin and elegant like the other executives' wives I occasionally saw in photos on his social media. I didn't wear designer clothes that communicated status and purchasing power. I didn't frequent the same expensive salons in Notting Hill. I didn't talk fluently about international travel or sophisticated investments. I was just Eleanor, the math teacher who woke up at 5 every morning to teach uninterested teenagers at a public school. I shopped at the local supermarket, meticulously comparing prices between different brands. I cut my own hair to save money. I found genuine joy in books borrowed from the public library and old movies on television. The main ballroom of the Dorchester was a visual symphony of opulence that made me feel like an intruder in a museum after hours, an imposter who had gained access to a world that clearly didn't belong to me. Baccarat crystal chandeliers hung from the ornate ceiling like captured constellations, casting infinite golden reflections on the marble-covered walls that silently told the story of London's most powerful. Women glided across the polished dance floor in dresses that cost more than my net annual salary, their jewelry shimmering under the multifaceted lights like personal galaxies orbiting their necks and wrists. Men in impeccable tuxedos conversed in hermetically sealed groups about multi-million-dollar deals, mergers and acquisitions, and international investments, their Swiss watches reflecting the light of the chandeliers like small golden suns announcing their wealth on their wrists. The sophisticated scent of freshly grilled prawns, imported smoked salmon, and authentic Iranian caviar harmoniously mingled with the aroma of premium Cuban cigars and vintage French champagne, creating an atmosphere of luxury that seemed almost unreal, cinematic. It was a world where every detail screamed money, power, and social status. Everything I didn't represent, everything our simple and honest middle-class life could never provide, no matter how much David earned or how much I saved. I walked slowly among the elegant groups, my steps careful and measured in the 2-inch heels I rarely wore, which left me slightly off balance. I anxiously searched for David among hundreds of unfamiliar faces that seemed to be straight out of a BBC drama or the covers of society magazines. Each step echoed on the marble floor like an involuntary announcement of my inappropriate presence in that sacred temple of the London elite. I passed by fluent English conversations about international business and expansion into emerging markets, sophisticated discussions about contemporary art and private collections, and intellectual debates about investments in French vineyards and properties in Paris. Crystal clear, rehearsed laughter rang out about vacations at Swiss resorts and shopping at Parisian boutiques. It was like walking through a glamorous film I was clearly not a part of, a parallel and inaccessible universe where my husband moved with a social ease and confidence I rarely had the privilege of witnessing at home. That's when I finally found him, near the expansive terrace that offered a breathtaking view of the illuminated river, where fireworks still crackled in the starry night. My world completely disintegrated, like a house of cards hit by a hurricane. David was more handsome and elegant than I had ever seen him in 11 years of marriage, his tailored tuxedo perfectly hugging his athletic body, which he kept in rigorous shape at the exclusive company gym. His posture was confident and relaxed, his gestures expansive and charismatic, as he told some elaborate story that made a select group of people laugh with genuine, enthusiastic glee. His eyes shone with a vibrant social energy that had completely disappeared from our domestic interactions for at least 3 years. It was like watching a talented actor perform a better, more socially palatable version of the man I was married to, a version I rarely had the privilege of knowing or was allowed to interact with, and by his side, so close to him that their bodies almost touched, with a physical and emotional intimacy that cut through me like a sharp blade, was Beatrice. I knew her full name because I had spent weeks obsessively and discreetly researching, asking seemingly casual questions to mutual acquaintances, meticulously scouring his social media when he left his phone at home, patiently piecing together a painful puzzle of the sophisticated parallel life my husband had carefully built away from me. Beatrice, 32, was literally everything I couldn't be in my most ambitious and unrealistic dreams. An architect who graduated with honors from King's College London, with a postgraduate degree in urban sustainability in New York, and an influential partner at a prestigious firm in Chelsea that designed multi-million-pound homes and commercial complexes for the London elite and international businessmen. Her dark hair fell in perfect, professionally styled waves over her tanned, bare shoulders, which spoke eloquently of regular weekends in the Cotswolds and frequent vacations at exclusive Caribbean resorts. Her party dress was an international haute couture piece, likely an Elie Saab or Marchesa, that hugged every curve of her sculpted body as if it had been painted directly onto her skin by a Renaissance artist. Her jewelry, a stunning necklace of black pearls, diamond earrings that caught and reflected the light like small lighthouses, and an elaborate white gold bracelet that contoured her wrist like a work of art, sparkled under the terrace lights like personal constellations that silently declared her wealth and impeccable taste. She represented everything I had ceased to be when I got married and became a dedicated housewife. Ambitious, financially independent, sophisticated, confident, and the absolute owner of her own life and destiny. But more painful than all of that, more devastating than any material comparison, was the way David looked at her. With genuine admiration, real intellectual interest, and a complete, absorbed attention that he hadn't given me in literally years. The way she touched his arm was both casual and possessive, a subtle dance of territorial ownership where her fingers slid across the impeccable sleeve of his tuxedo as if marking her territory elegantly but definitively. The way she leaned in gracefully to whisper something seemingly intimate in his ear, her lips almost brushing his skin, made him smile with a look of genuine, relaxed pleasure that I hadn't seen directed at me since the golden first years of our marriage. The way he responded to her intelligent observations, with spontaneous laughter and elaborate comments, engaging in a stimulating conversation that our home had lost so long ago, I no longer even remembered what it sounded like when two people connected intellectually. They talked as intellectual and social equals, exchanging sophisticated ideas about sustainable architecture, modern urbanism, contemporary art, international travel, and cultural investments, topics on which I, a public high school math teacher, had little or nothing to contribute that would be considered relevant or interesting. It was obvious to any casual observer that they formed an absolutely perfect couple on paper, both professionally successful, both culturally sophisticated, and both naturally belonging to that world of luxury and privilege, like fish to water. And I was just the inconvenient legal obstacle preventing this ideal union from officially becoming a reality in the eyes of society. For a few agonizing, surreal moments, I stood completely paralyzed at the terrace entrance, watching my own marital tragedy unfold like a dramatic soap opera, of which I was simultaneously the protagonist and a completely powerless spectator. Memories came like powerful waves crashing on a rocky beach. Our first romantic meeting at university, when he was studying civil engineering and I was studying mathematics, when he said with apparent sincerity that I was the most intelligent and interesting girl he had ever met, and that he loved our long conversations about education and social change through knowledge. Our simple but happy honeymoon in a charming bed and breakfast in the countryside, when we made modest but enthusiastic plans for the future, when he said with conviction that we didn't need material luxury to be completely happy because we had each other, and that was more than enough. The golden first years of marriage, when he still respectfully consulted me on important decisions, when he genuinely valued my opinion on everything from home decor to family finances, when we made love with real passion and not just out of automated, predictable marital obligation. And then, gradually and inexorably, the deterioration that corroded our relationship like rust, the conversations that became monologues about his work, while my comments about my students were systematically ignored or minimized, the romantic dinners that turned into silent meals in front of the television, the outings together that were reduced to sporadic social obligations, where he seemed to be fulfilling a tedious social protocol rather than actually enjoying my company. I had watched my marriage die slowly like a plant, inexorably wilting from lack of water and attention, but I always convinced myself, with forced optimism, that it was just a temporary and surmountable phase, that things would magically return to normal when the pressure at his work eased, when our financial situation significantly improved, when the heavy routine became less suffocating. Now, seeing him with Beatrice, I realized with devastating clarity that the problem had never been a lack of time, energy, or opportunity. The problem was that he had simply lost interest in me, in our domestic life together, in the person I had become over years of exclusive dedication to our marriage. And perhaps, even more painfully, he had found in another woman everything I could no longer awaken in him: intellectual admiration, physical desire, social pride, and the genuine desire to show the world whom he had chosen to love and with whom he wanted to be seen publicly. The humiliation came quickly and devastatingly when David finally looked up casually and saw me standing at the terrace entrance like an inconvenient ghost from his past. What happened next was like watching a car crash in slow motion. First, total confusion in his eyes, as if his brain couldn't process the physical impossibility of my presence in that sacred place that had always been exclusively his territory, and that of the people who really mattered in his life. Then, the gradual and horrified recognition, accompanied by an expression of absolute panic that transformed his features into a mask of horror I had never seen before in 11 years of living together. The confident, relaxed smile instantly vanished, as if someone had cut the power to his entire face. For a few precious, revealing seconds, he looked like a little boy, caught doing something terrible and explicitly forbidden, his cheeks visibly turning red, his eyes widening in shock, small beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the fresh, perfumed sea breeze. Beatrice, instinctively sensing the dramatic change in his behavior, followed his gaze until she found my face, and her expression also changed, but not to panic. In her intelligent, calculating eyes, I first saw analytical curiosity, then a quick and efficient assessment, and finally a kind of cruel satisfaction mixed with amusement, as if she were watching the final act of a dramatic play, whose inevitable ending she already knew. David recomposed himself with the impressive speed of someone professionally trained in crisis situations and damage control, quickly putting on a mask of controlled irritation that I knew so painfully well. It was the same expression he used when I questioned him about inexplicable schedules, or when I timidly dared to suggest that we might do some social activity together as a normal couple. "Eleanor!" His voice came out louder and more aggressive than he intended, cutting through the elegant conversations around us like a discordant scream in a silent library. The tone carried a toxic mix of surprise, contained anger, and something that sounded dangerously close to betrayal, as if I were the one to blame for daring to appear in the sacred place where he kept his secret, socially relevant life. "What on earth are you doing here? How did you even get into this place?" The words came out loaded with a barely disguised aggression that made several elegant heads turn abruptly in our direction, turning our private marital discussion into an embarrassing public spectacle for the involuntary entertainment of the London elite. The entire group of sophisticated people around him instantly stopped talking and turned to watch us with growing curiosity, like privileged spectators of a domestic drama that had unexpectedly invaded their exclusive sanctuary of sophistication. Beatrice examined me from head to toe, with the surgical precision of a woman experienced in evaluating female competition. Her brown eyes methodically catalogued every revealing detail of my handmade dress, which, despite being well sewn and carefully crafted, was obviously amateur when compared to the international haute couture that surrounded her. She noted my gold clutch, bought on sale, which showed microscopic but definitively revealing signs of being a well-made imitation. My hair, which I had tried to arrange in an elegant bun using YouTube tutorials, had clearly not received the professional attention of an expensive hairdresser. My carefully manicured nails, although clean and well kept, did not have the perfect finish and sophisticated designs of a luxury salon. Her detailed analysis lasted perhaps 15 seconds, but it was more than enough time for her to reach a definitive conclusion about who I was, what role I played in David's life, and what real level of threat I posed to any future plans she might have with him. The silent verdict was clearly written on her controlled expression. I was completely irrelevant, a minor and temporary complication that would be easily resolved with minimal effort. "Is this your wife?" Beatrice asked with seemingly innocent curiosity, and the way she pronounced the word wife was like hearing someone comment on an old, outdated piece of furniture that had not yet been discarded or donated to charity. There was a subtle mix of polite disdain and anthropological curiosity in her well-modulated voice, as if she were observing an interesting but completely outdated specimen in a museum of social history. She didn't even try to hide her final assessment. I was clearly an embarrassing relic from an earlier era of David's life, a commitment impulsively made before he discovered his true social and professional possibilities in the real world. The people around us began to whisper among themselves, with the practiced discretion of high society. But their muffled laughter and sideways glances created a cruel symphony of collective judgment that echoed in my soul like a discordant orchestra playing my social requiem. It was the kind of sophisticated humiliation I had subconsciously feared my entire life. Not a direct, honest confrontation, but this civilized and elegantly cruel form of being publicly dissected by people who considered themselves my natural superiors in every relevant aspect of successful, modern life. "Yes, she's my wife," David finally replied, but the tone he used was more devastating than any direct insult could have been. He spoke about me in the same casual, slightly embarrassed way one uses to explain a past error in judgment that has not yet been fully corrected or resolved. It was obvious to everyone present that I represented more of an inconvenient social obligation than a genuinely desired companion, more of a logistical problem to be managed than a person he had consciously chosen to love and with whom he had decided to share his life. "Eleanor, you shouldn't be here. This is definitely not your place, and you are causing an extremely embarrassing situation for everyone here." Every word was like a heavy hammer striking the last fragmented remnants of my dignity, shattering any romantic illusion I might still hold about our marriage and my role in his life. Not your place. 11 years of dedicated marriage, 11 years of being the supportive and understanding wife, 11 years of cooking his favorite meals, washing and ironing his clothes, managing our home as if it were a small business, being his enthusiastic audience for his professional victories, and his comforting shoulder for his frustrations and defeats. And all I received in return was this: "Not your place." The words reverberated in my mind like a social death sentence, echoing painfully in the empty chambers of my heart that had gradually emptied over years of systematic emotional neglect. I felt hot tears burning in my eyes like acid, desperately fighting to escape and complete my total public humiliation. But I absolutely refused to cry there, in front of all of them, especially in front of her. I wouldn't give them that final satisfaction, that last precious piece of my dignity to trample with their expensive shoes. I swallowed the tears with a painful effort, feeling them go down my throat like crushed glass, leaving a trail of physical pain that was added to the emotional agony that was already completely consuming me. I just wanted... My voice came out trembling and pathetic, almost inaudible amid the sophisticated ambient noise of the party and the fireworks that were still majestically exploding outside. I just wanted to start the new year next to my husband, to participate for the first time in an important part of his professional life, to finally meet the people you spend so much time with and who are clearly important and meaningful to you. The words came out desperately and completely jumbled, as if I were pathetically trying to justify my own existence before a hostile and impatient court. 11 years together, and I never, ever participated in any of your company's events, never met your important colleagues, never saw the social environment where you move with such impressive naturalness and confidence. My voice began to fail embarrassingly, and I realized with horror that I was only burying myself deeper in the hole of public humiliation, providing involuntary and embarrassing entertainment for people who clearly saw me as a figure who was simultaneously tragic and slightly ridiculous. Beatrice laughed, a melodious, poisonous sound that cut through the perfumed night air like a sharp blade. How sweet, really. The dedicated wife finally wants to get to know her husband's real world. She said real world, as if our domestic life were a childish fantasy I stubbornly refused to abandon, as if that were relevant to what happens here. Her voice carried a polite condescension that made every word sound like an elegant but deliberately cruel slap. The group around us laughed again, louder this time, and I felt every laugh as a physical stab in the chest. It was as if I were a wounded animal being methodically attacked by a pack of elegant predators who were genuinely amused by my suffering while maintaining their impeccable manners and social sophistication. I could see people from other groups discreetly approaching, drawn to the unfolding drama, like flies to honey, whispering to each other and pointing in my direction with the practiced discretion of high society. The entire party was gradually becoming aware of the embarrassing spectacle I had unintentionally created, and I was the humiliated protagonist of a comedy of errors, of which everyone else was a privileged and amused spectator. David grabbed my arm with a surprising force that would surely leave purple bruises on my skin the next day, his fingers digging into my flesh with a barely contained violence that deeply frightened me. He had never touched me like this before, with this brutality disguised as necessary social control. "Let's go immediately, Eleanor. You're making the biggest fool of yourself, and you're professionally embarrassing me beyond repair." His voice was low, but filled with a rage that made his words cut like sharp razors. He began to drag me determinedly toward the exit, and each forced step was a new public humiliation. Each curious glance from those present was a new wound in my already completely shattered soul. But it was when we reached the hotel's main lobby, under the monumental chandeliers that illuminated the gilded marble like small captured suns, that something completely unexpected and transformative happened. An elegant woman, approximately 50 years old, with perfectly styled gray hair in a sophisticated chignon, and wearing a cocktail dress that screamed European sophistication and old money, approached us with an expression of genuine surprise that quickly turned into recognition, and then into something very close to admiration and joy. My God. Eleanor? Eleanor Hayes? Her voice echoed through the lobby with a natural authority that made several heads turn respectfully, including David's, who abruptly stopped dragging me and looked at me with total confusion. "Teacher Eleanor Hayes from Northwood Public High School?" The woman continued, her smile widening as if she had found a long-lost treasure. I recognized her instantly, although she was unrecognizably elegant in that environment of absolute luxury. It was Dr. Caroline Foster, one of the most powerful women in the UK, CEO of Foster Holdings, a business conglomerate that controlled everything from supermarket chains to construction companies, including an educational foundation that was a national benchmark. She was regularly cited in Forbes magazine as one of the most influential executives in Europe, a self-made woman who had built an impressive business empire from literally nothing. And I had been her son, Oliver's, teacher for 2 consecutive years when he was in high school, more than 10 years ago. Oliver Foster had arrived in my classroom as a rebellious teenager with serious discipline problems, the son of a workaholic mother who was rarely present, carrying all the anger and emotional abandonment that money cannot solve. "Dr. Foster," I exclaimed, my voice mixing genuine surprise with an unexpected joy that cut through the humiliation I was feeling like a ray of sunshine through dark clouds. "What a wonderful surprise to see you here. How is Oliver?" David looked at me with an expression that mixed growing confusion with something that looked a lot like panic, clearly unable to understand how I could personally know one of the most powerful and respected women in the country. Dr. Foster came closer, her eyes shining with a deep emotion I didn't expect to see. "Oliver is incredible, Eleanor. He graduated with distinction in business from Oxford, got his master's at Harvard with a full scholarship, and is now helping me run our company's educational foundation. And you know what? He talks about you at least once a month." She paused dramatically, looking directly into my eyes with an intensity that completely surprised me. "Eleanor, you saved my son's life. When he arrived in your classroom, he was a lost, rebellious boy, without direction, without purpose in life. I was so obsessively focused on building my company that I didn't realize I was losing my only son in the process. You were the first person who managed to see beyond his rebellion, who saw the immense potential he had, who believed in him when even I no longer did." Her words echoed through the lobby, and I could see that some people around us had stopped to listen, including Beatrice, who had approached curiously. "Oliver always says that you were the teacher who completely changed his life, who taught him not only math, but discipline, responsibility, self-esteem, and especially to believe in his own potential. He says you saw things in him that he didn't even know existed." David was visibly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking, but Dr. Foster continued, her voice growing stronger and clearer. "You know, Eleanor, for years I tried to find a way to thank you properly for what you did for Oliver. I offered generous donations to your school. I tried to find out if you needed anything, but you were always very discreet, very humble. Oliver told me you never wanted public recognition, that you always said you were just doing your job." She smiled with a genuine warmth that completely contrasted with the cold, calculating environment of the party. "But the truth is, you did much more than your job. You fulfilled a true vocation, a life mission. You took a broken boy and turned him into a man of character. That's when something extraordinary happened." "Everyone!" Dr. Foster turned to the group that had formed around us and raised her voice slightly. "I want you to meet a very special person. This is Eleanor Hayes, one of the most exceptional teachers I have ever met in my life." Several people approached, including some of the party's most important executives. Eleanor has dedicated 15 years of her life to educating young people in the public school system, and I can guarantee you that she truly transforms lives. My son Oliver was completely lost at 16, and Eleanor not only managed to save him academically, but gave him the sense of purpose and self-esteem that I, with all my money and influence, could not provide. The silence that followed was different from the previous humiliation. It was a silence of respectful attention, of people genuinely interested in what was being said. Beatrice looked at me now with a completely different expression, no longer disdain, but curious reevaluation. David was clearly trying to process this dramatic change in the situation's dynamic. A math teacher, one of the executives said, a distinguished man of about 60. "What a fundamental discipline. I've always admired educators who can get young people interested in exact sciences." Dr. Foster was not finished. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something important. 3 years ago, when we decided to expand our educational foundation, Oliver suggested we look for exceptional public school teachers to develop innovative methodologies. He mentioned your name immediately. He said you had developed teaching techniques that made students with difficulties in math not only understand the subject, but fall in love with it." She paused dramatically. "We tried to find you through the Department of Education, but you had changed schools, and we ended up losing contact." Oliver was frustrated. He said we had lost the opportunity to work with the best teacher he knew. My heart began to beat faster. Not from anxiety this time, but from a growing excitement. "I did develop some alternative methods," I replied, my voice becoming firmer and more confident. "I realized that many students had difficulty with math because no one ever showed them the practical application of what they were learning. I started connecting mathematical concepts to real situations, family budgets, discount calculations, salary increase percentages, and basic financial planning. I felt a confidence I hadn't experienced in years growing inside me. Students started to realize that math wasn't just abstract numbers, but practical tools to improve their lives." Dr. Foster clapped softly, her enthusiasm visibly growing. "Exactly. That is revolutionary, Eleanor. Most educators teach pure theory, but you created bridges between academic knowledge and practical application." She turned to the group around us. "Do you know how difficult it is to find educators with that vision? Eleanor doesn't just teach math, she teaches life through math." Several people nodded in approval, clearly impressed. One of those present, who identified himself as the HR director of a multinational, commented, "You know, we've always had difficulty finding employees who truly understand applied math. Most come from university knowing formulas, but not knowing how to solve real problems." That's when Dr. Foster asked the question that would change everything. "Eleanor, are you still teaching?" When I confirmed that I was, she continued, "And have you ever thought about expanding your impact? Instead of influencing 30 students a year, how about influencing 300 teachers, who in turn would influence thousands of students?" My heart raced. "Our foundation is developing a national program to train math teachers. We need someone to lead this initiative, someone who has real classroom experience, who knows the practical challenges of public education, but who also has the innovative vision necessary to transform math education in the UK." The entire group was now paying full attention to our conversation. David looked as if he had been struck by lightning, his expression oscillating between shock and something that looked a lot like involuntary admiration. Beatrice had moved closer, clearly interested in the turn of events. "The starting salary would be £70,000 a year," Dr. Foster continued, "plus full benefits, a company car, a premium health plan, and a significant budget to develop and implement your methodologies. But more importantly than that, Eleanor, you would have the opportunity to transform math education throughout the country." The silence that followed was absolute. £70,000 a year was almost twice what David earned as an engineer. "But there's more," Dr. Foster continued, smiling. "The position would include international travel for educational conferences, exchanges with American and European universities, and the possibility of publishing your methodologies worldwide. You would become a national benchmark in math education." It was at that moment that another person approached our group. It was Mr. Charles Montgomery, the very owner of the construction company where David worked, an imposing 60-year-old man I only knew from photos. "Excuse the intrusion," he said elegantly, but I couldn't help but overhear something about educational methodologies. "I'm Charles Montgomery." "The lady is a teacher?" Dr. Foster answered for me. "Charles, this is Eleanor Hayes, an exceptional educator. I just offered her a position at our foundation." Mr. Montgomery smiled. "What an interesting coincidence. Our company is looking for a director of corporate education. We have more than 5,000 employees who need training in basic math for engineering operations." The air was charged with possibilities. Mr. Montgomery continued. "If you accept the position at Dr. Foster's foundation, we could enter a consulting contract, £15,000 monthly to develop training programs for our employees." My head was spinning. Between the foundation and the consultancy, we would be talking about £85,000 a year. David was as pale as a ghost. Beatrice looked at me with an expression I never imagined seeing. Respect mixed with something close to envy. "Are there other companies interested?" Mr. Montgomery asked. Dr. Foster laughed. "Charles, Eleanor hasn't even accepted our proposal yet. But yes, I know at least 3 multinationals that would be interested in her methodologies." That's when a young elegant woman approached the group. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm Julie Roberts from the BBC. We're always looking for inspiring stories for our shows. The story of the teacher who developed revolutionary methodologies would be perfect for our documentary series." The group was growing rapidly. Important people were approaching, wanting to meet the revolutionary teacher. A member of parliament, 2 well-known businesswomen, a university dean. Everyone wanted to talk to me, to know my methods, to discuss partnership possibilities. "Eleanor," Dr. Foster said, "I need to be honest with you. Your reputation in the educational community is greater than you imagine. Oliver wasn't the only student transformed by your methods. We discreetly researched and found dozens of your former students who are now successful and credit their achievements to your classes." She paused. "You created a methodology that works, Eleanor, and the UK needs it." Mr. Montgomery added, "The offer is open, Teacher Eleanor. Our company, like several others, would be honored to work with someone of your caliber." David finally found his voice, but when he spoke, it sounded small and lost. "Eleanor, I didn't know that you were so—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Beatrice, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. "Teacher Eleanor, I'm an architect, but I've always admired educators. What you do is transform societies." Her voice no longer had that condescending tone. It was genuine respect. The moment was interrupted by a spectacular burst of fireworks. It was almost midnight. "To Eleanor Hayes, an exceptional educator." Dr. Foster raised her glass. The entire group raised their glasses, and others around them joined in without even knowing why, just following the example of important people. "Eleanor," Dr. Foster said when the fireworks subsided, "you have until tomorrow to give me an answer. But I want you to know, you wouldn't just be another employee. You would be the National Director of Educational Methodologies for the Foster Foundation. Your name would be in all the schools that implement your methods." When the party ended, David and I walked in silence to the car. The atmosphere had completely changed. He was no longer the embarrassed husband trying to hide his inadequate wife. He was a man who had just discovered he was married to someone he had completely underestimated. "Eleanor," he finally said, I didn't know. Why did you never tell me about your methods, about the recognition?" His voice was small, filled with guilt. I looked at him, this man who had spent years making me feel insignificant. "You never asked, David. You never showed interest in my work. To you, I was just an ordinary public school teacher." In the following days, everything changed. I accepted the position at the Foster Foundation and the consulting contracts. My salary increased from $30,000 to over $85,000 a year. TV shows interviewed me. Universities invited me to lecture. Publishers wanted to publish my methods. David tried to get closer, but it was too late. The woman he had hidden out of shame was now nationally recognized. "Eleanor," he said one night, "can we start over? I made a terrible mistake." I looked at him with serenity. "David, you didn't make a mistake. You revealed who you really are. And now, I've discovered who I really am." 3 months later, I was on a talk show, explaining my methods to millions. 6 months later, I was speaking at a UNESCO conference in Paris. A year later, I was considered one of the most influential educators in the UK. David and Beatrice stayed together, but the irony is delicious. She never managed to see him in the same way after that night. The man who had been ashamed of an extraordinary woman never seemed impressive again to an ambitious woman. And I discovered that sometimes we need to be completely humiliated to find our true greatness. The teacher who was hidden out of shame became an internationally celebrated educator. Sometimes, the greatest gifts come disguised as the greatest humiliations. In the last conversation we had, David said, "Eleanor, I lost the most incredible woman in the world because I didn't know how to see what was right in front of me." I smiled at him gently. "No, David, you set me free to discover who I was always meant to be." Today, when I look back, I am grateful for that terrible night at the Dorchester. It was the moment I stopped hiding and started to shine. And when you are meant to shine, no one else's shame can keep you in the shadows forever. What do you think is the main takeaway from Eleanor's story? Let me know if you would like me to rewrite another story for you.